3 promotions in 4 years. Then a new manager arrived, and within 18 months, she stopped trusting her own judgment. Not because something broke, because someone very patiently took it apart. If you've ever left work feeling like a fraud, even though your numbers say otherwise, in 15 minutes, you'll know what this is called. She still checks her inbox at 2 a.m. She hasn't worked there in 2 years. Rachel was one of the highest performing product managers at a mid-sized tech firm in Austin. The person people went to when things broke, not because she was loud, because she was right. She wasn't fragile. She wasn't insecure, which is exactly the kind of person a narcissistic manager needs. Not someone weak, someone whose competence can be slowly redirected towards serving them. His name was Greg, new VP of Product, corner office, easy laugh, the kind of executive who remembered your dog's name and your kid's birthday. Nothing about Greg looked dangerous. She was relieved when he arrived. Her previous manager had been absent. Greg seemed like the opposite, attentive, engaged, interested, which is usually when people like Greg become the most effective. The strange part is, none of this looked like sabotage, not in the first month, not in the third, not even when she started doubting herself. The compliments came first, and they were specific. Rachel, you're the backbone of this department, in front of the entire team. She felt seen. She felt valued. She was the backbone. That's why it works. Because the compliments weren't recognition, they were reconnaissance. Greg was mapping exactly what she needed to hear, and once he knew what made her feel safe, he knew exactly where to cut. Have you ever had someone praise you in public and then quietly contradict you in private? Not aggressively, not even directly, just a raised eyebrow, a gentle, "Are we sure about this approach?" A slight pause before saying, "Interesting," in a tone that means the opposite. That's not feedback, that's calibration, and it was turned on purpose. But something else was happening behind the scenes. In meetings, Greg started asking Rachel to walk the team through decisions she'd already made, decisions he had approved. But the framing had changed. It wasn't a presentation, it was a defense. She was being put on trial for choices she'd already won. "I just want to make sure we're aligned," he'd say, every time, the same phrase. And every time, Rachel adjusted, softened her language, hedged her recommendations, added more slides, more data, more proof. She was the backbone. That's why he leaned on her until she bent. Have you ever spent an entire Sunday building a deck, not because the project required it, but because you were terrified of one person's face in the room? That's not diligence, that's survival, and someone installed that fear in you. And this is where Greg's strategy becomes visible. He had a technique Rachel didn't recognize until much later. He called it thinking out loud. He would pull her into one-on-ones and float ideas, half-baked concepts, loose strategies, and then wait. If Rachel built on the idea, Greg would present it to leadership as his own. If she pushed back, he would note the resistance. And the next meeting, her name would be missing from the invite. Have you ever watched someone take credit for your work and felt like saying something would make you look petty? That's not humility. That's a system working exactly as designed. Rachel tried to address it once. She asked Greg, carefully, professionally, whether she could present her own recommendations directly to the executive team. He tilted his head, paused for 3 seconds. "Of course," he said, "once you're ready." She had been doing this job for 4 years. She had presented to the board 6 times before Greg arrived, and now she needed permission. She didn't bring it up again, and that single moment, that quiet withdrawal, was exactly what he needed, because after that, Rachel stopped pushing. She stopped asking. She started waiting. And here's what no one talks about. The isolation doesn't come from the boss directly. It comes from the people around you. Greg didn't just manage Rachel, he managed her reputation.
in Slack threads she wasn't part of, in quick syncs she wasn't invited to. Greg was reshaping how the team saw her, not through lies, through framing. Rachel's great, but she needs a bit of guardrails. She's strong on execution, just not quite there yet on the strategic side. Her closest colleague, James, stopped coming to her for product reviews. They had worked together for 3 years. She had helped him through his first major release. When she asked why, he didn't answer immediately. He looked down at his coffee. Greg mentioned he wanted to centralize those decisions. I figured it was above my pay grade. He wasn't betraying her, he was surviving. And that's the coldest part of what Greg did. He didn't create enemies, he created silence. Rachel started eating lunch at her desk, not because she was busy, because the table in the cafeteria had begun to feel like a performance, a place where she'd have to pretend she wasn't noticing the shifts, the shorter conversations, the eyes that looked just past her when she walked in. Have you ever stopped going somewhere, not because you were told to leave, but because staying required more energy than you had left? That's not introversion. That's the perimeter working, and you didn't even build it. She was the backbone. That's why no one questioned what was happening.
And Rachel was not the exception. She was the rule. According to workplace research published in 2023, nearly 1 in 3 American employees reports experiencing bullying at work. And in 65% of those cases, the source is the direct supervisor, not a colleague, not a stranger, the person signing the performance review. Greg told her once, casually, almost as an afterthought, "You know, Rachel, people in leadership have been asking about your communication style. Nothing serious, just something to be aware of." She replayed that sentence for weeks, obsessively. Who said it? When? What did they mean? Was she too direct, too quiet, too much? He never told her the answers. And here's what Rachel didn't realize yet. Greg may never have asked anyone. The point wasn't the feedback. The point was the anxiety. Once someone is afraid of invisible critics, you don't need to criticize them anymore. They do it themselves. There was one moment she remembered later. She had the answer in a meeting. She opened her mouth and stopped. Not because she didn't know, because for a split second she thought, what would Greg say? That was the first time. After that, every time. Rachel started rehearsing every sentence before meetings, rewriting emails 4 times, arriving 10 minutes early to every call, not to prepare, but to sit in silence and imagine every possible objection. She wasn't Rachel anymore. She was a performance review waiting to happen, a rough draft of herself, constantly edited to fit someone else's red pen. At some point, you stop trusting your own instincts at work and start filtering every decision through one question. What would he think? When that question becomes automatic, they own your calendar, your confidence, and your career without ever signing a single document. By that point, the pattern already had a name. Organizational psychologists describe it as narcissistic management. It doesn't require a romantic relationship. It only requires a power imbalance and someone willing to exploit it. If you're in that place right now, you probably call it being professional, being careful, being strategic. It's not. It's fear with a corporate vocabulary. If you asked Rachel during this period, she would have told you she had a demanding but fair manager. She would have said she was learning and growing. She would have meant it. And she would have been completely wrong. The breaking point wasn't dramatic. It was a Wednesday, 3 o'clock, a nothing meeting about a nothing feature rollout. Rachel had prepared, of course she had, 15 slides for a 10-minute slot. Greg was on his phone for most of it. At the end, he looked up, smiled, and said, "Good stuff.
But next time, maybe loop in David earlier. He's got the strategic lens for this. David had been at the company for 5 months. Rachel had trained him. She didn't say anything. She nodded. She walked back to her desk. She opened her laptop, and she stared at the screen for 11 minutes without touching the keyboard. And in that silence, it was the first time Rachel heard the question clearly. When was the last time you trusted your own judgment without checking whether Greg would approve? She couldn't remember. She almost stayed. Of course she did. Because Greg had good days. Days when he asked about her weekend, brought her coffee, copied her in emails to the CEO. Days when he said, "I don't know what I'd do without you on this team." And those days were the most dangerous because they kept the warm version alive. The version that made leaving feel like ingratitude, like overreacting, like career suicide. Rachel opened her resignation letter 6 times over the following month. She typed the first line, deleted it, typed it again. Her cursor blinked at the top of the page for 22 minutes one Thursday night. She picked up her phone once, scrolled to Greg's name. Her thumb hovered there for 9 seconds. She almost texted him to say she wanted to talk, to give it one more try. Because the warm version felt real, and walking away meant accepting that it never was. Leaving didn't feel like escaping. It felt like she was proving Greg right, confirming she really wasn't strategic enough, tough enough, good enough. She was the backbone. That's why walking away felt like she was the one breaking something. She submitted her resignation on a Friday morning. She had rehearsed the conversation in her head for 3 days, how she would explain her decision, what she would say about the experience, how she would stay professional. None of it mattered. Greg accepted it in 40 seconds flat. Didn't ask why, didn't counteroffer, didn't ask her to reconsider, just said, "I'm sorry to hear that. You've been a great execution partner." Execution partner, after 4 years, after 3 promotions, after building the department he inherited. That was her exit interview, 40 seconds. Rachel started her own consultancy 7 months later. Within the first year, she had 12 clients. 2 of them were former colleagues who left after she did. They told her the same story, different details, same pattern, same Greg. Greg still works there. According to those 2 former employees, Rachel wasn't the first person this happened to. One of them mentioned a woman who left 3 years before Rachel arrived. Same pattern, same phrases, same gentle smile. And she wasn't the last. She is not a victim of this story. She is proof that you can walk out. But here's what she'll tell you herself. The voice didn't disappear. It just changed its tone. Before every proposal, there's a pause. Before every decision, a quiet question. Are we sure about this approach? And the voice doesn't sound like Greg anymore. It sounds like her. The most dangerous manager you'll ever have won't yell at you, won't threaten you. They'll praise you just enough to keep you performing and undermine you just enough to make you doubt every result. They don't stay in the office. They stay in you. If someone came to your mind while watching this, there's a reason for that. She was the backbone. That's why she still wonders.